Hello, this is Dr. Gay from First Lake MRI, and this is a 15-year-old male who has pain in his fingers, mostly the fourth finger. He went rock climbing recently, and he has continued pain and decided to get an MRI here to look at this. And we have two different planes here. This is called the axial plane and short axis of his fingers. Here's his index finger, third, fourth, fifth. And this is what we call a sagittal view. We're looking at this finger in profile. This is the third finger, so you can see here we're looking at the third finger in profile. This is towards the back. This is towards the front of the palm. We see these three phalanges, the proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, distal phalanx, and we see this band along the palm. This is the flexor tendon. So when the muscles contract, it pulls on this and the finger will flex forward. And that flexor, there's two flexor tendons here, they look intact here. And the extensor tendon that goes along the back here is smaller, much more difficult to see, but it is intact. Now, one thing we look for is the bone. Does the bone have a fracture, dislocation? Is there fluid in the joints? And these bones look really good, and we don't see any fluid in the joints. We look for arthritis. We look for the tendons. Are they torn, ruptured? And they look good. And one other thing we look for is, do the tendons hug the bone closely? So the flexor tendons, there are little areas that loop around, these ligamentous structures that loop around. They're called the pulleys, and they hold the tendon close to the bone. So when the finger contracts, the tendon doesn't drift away from the bone. It hugs the bone. And right here we see this proximal phalanx. We see the flexor tendon is held really closely here because, again, there's a pulley that wraps around, forms a saddle, and holds that close into place. So in this third finger, we see a little bit of brightness here. And we do see this elevated ever so slightly. There's a little gap here. So this may be a partial tear, one of these pulleys that holds this on tight. And here, if we go distal, we see that the middle phalanx is here. We see the flexor tendon hugs pretty closely to the middle phalanx, and then it attaches here distally. Now we're going to go to the fourth finger. That's where the pain is mostly. And on the fourth finger, we see that I put these markers of where these pulleys are. We see that the fluid here is not normal. There's a little bit of fluid between the middle phalanx and the flexor tendon. On the last set of images there, the third finger, let's go back over to those. We saw that there was really no significant gap. The tendon and the bone were really closely opposed. So that pulley that wrapped across and held it in tightly was intact. But in this one, we see that there's fluid here, and we see that there's a little bit of separation between the bone and this. So this is a tear or injury of one of these pulleys. So there's multiple pulleys. They're hard to remember, so we just look them up typically. And we have what we call annular pulleys that are more broad, and they just are rounded. They're broad loops that wrap around like a saddle. There's a broad one right here called the A2 pulley, and it wraps around here and holds this in tight. And these ones that are smaller are called the Cruciform Pulleys, and they're small bands that loop across each other. They're more like little straps that crisscross each other. So here's one, another one, and you really can't see them. They're very, very small typically, but you can note if there's fluid around there or if there's any separation. And now we're going to go to the short axis view to see if we can see these any better. So if we go down here distally, we see the flexor tendon of the fourth. We see the bone. Look how close they are together. There's no abnormal signal, just a nice dark flexor tendon. As we go more distally, we see a little bit of brightness here, a little bit of fluid in this area. And so this is where that C1 pulley is. And so there may be an injury of that C1 pulley just because there's a little bit of brightness, but I don't see it really pulled off. I don't see fluid surrounding it, so it may be a low-grade injury of that. But it does not look like it's ruptured. Here we go to the C3 pulley, and this is nice. Everything's held really tightly in here. There's no abnormal signal. And we get to this next one, and now we're starting to see a little bit of abnormal signal. We can actually see a pulley here. This is part of the pulley mechanism, this little black dot here and this one over here. If we go to right where we see the maximum signal, we see this bright fluid surrounding this flexor tendon. We see a little nub here, nub here. These are parts of the pulley mechanism, so they should continue all the way around and hold this in tight. And this should sit right in here, and instead this pulley is ruptured, and the flexor tendon is drifted outwards, and we just see the ends of the pulley mechanism. So this is a A4 pulley. It looks like it's torn. We can see components of it here, and the flexor tendon is drifted upwards, and there's fluid surrounding. So that's an An injury, again, often seen with rock climbers. They have a lot of stress in their fingers when they're contracted and holding onto the rocks. And again, the pulleys, these little ligaments will tear, and they'll allow the flexor tendon to drift off just like this. Thank you very much.